fighting for survival and welfare, South and North, the unrecognized movement. Oops, sorry, that was panel 1. Okay, we're getting settled down and ready to go. Panel 2, asylum, immigration, and other struggles against poverty, ecological devastation, military occupation, and war. And I'd like to introduce Wintress Morris, who's going to co-chair the panel with me from Guyana. And I'm Lori from San Francisco Global Women's Strike, Bay Area. So our first panelist is Maggie Ronayne. Ronayne. She's with the Global Women's Strike in Ireland. She is an academic at the National University of Ireland in Galway. And she's going to speak on the Irish famine and immigration.
Thank you, Laurie. It's fantastic to be here. I suppose there's just a couple of things to say. First of all, Ireland being, they do call it the oldest colony of what later became the British Empire, many hundreds of years. And I was very struck by, I think it was what Jesho said this morning, about, they take our resources and we have to leave. We're forced to flee. And that really is the story of Irish people as well for many centuries. And I'm just going to mention just one example of that, which is what happened with the Great Famine, as it's called in Ireland, from 1845 to 1851 in the 19th century. There were many famines, of course, and anyone who comes from a colonised country, you'll know that, we know famine. But this was called the Great Famine. The official statistics were that 1 million people died and 1 million people had to emigrate. I don't actually believe them. I think it was a lot more. You know, the statistics are always downplaying. They always say that. But it was a genocide, and one of many that have happened to many colonised peoples. The reason that is often given, or you might have heard of the famine, they say the potato crop failed, right? And it sounds like it's just this natural disaster, this vegetable, it got the blight disease and it failed. Well, this disaster was not natural. And that is also true in all of these other cases where they say there are these natural disasters, earthquakes, natural, and somehow all these people die. Of course it's not natural, and of course it resulted from the fact this was an occupation. And what happened essentially over the previous few centuries was that people did not own the land they lived on. Either they were completely landless or they were tenants to the colonial elite. And because of that, they were in a struggle to survive on very small patches of land or no land. And one of the crops that you can grow and feed a family or several families on, if you're in that situation, is a potato. So people came to rely on the potato and able to feed a lot of people on a small land. The other thing was that what they were also struggling to protect and to survive through was a way of farming the land where people farmed in common. In Ireland it was called the Rundale system, but in Scotland Runrig, and there are many names for it. But people basically lived in a village together and shared resources and tried to work the land together in that way. The colonial landlords, some of them were Irish and some of them were what we call Anglo-Irish or English, but whatever, they were landlords, and they were trying to stop that way of farming. It wasn't profitable for them. What they wanted to do was clear people off the land because it was more profitable for them to have animals grazing the land. They would make more money that way. And so the famine for them was used as an enormous excuse to, first of all, they could get rid of a lot of people who died, and they could get rid of a lot of people also by forcing them. People were starving, people didn't have the money to stay on the land. They could force them into workhouses, or they could force them onto the famine ships, onto the emigration ships. So this is how 1 million plus people ended up having to leave. And people thought that they didn't just leave, they did all sorts of things to struggle, many victories through that enormous upheaval, that time of genocide as well. People participated in food riots, for example, at soup kitchens. There was an awful lot of corruption that went along with the relief works that were being done, but a lot of people ended up emigrating. And thank you. And what that emigration did was to destroy many communities. It destroyed many relationships that people had built up, that people had tried to protect, their relationship to the land. It destroyed knowledge, the way to go about doing things, the way to survive, the way to use that land. And although people fought not to leave, many people ended up having to go. An awful lot of women ended up in workhouses with their children, where you're forced to work in these workhouses for no pay. And they took a lot of young girls, particularly from those workhouses, and emigrated them to other colonies of the British Empire. And there are lots of other stories of servant girls, being raped, and a lot of things happening to women in those kinds of situations. Now, today, I know that this story will be familiar to a lot of people here in a lot of countries. People in Ireland are emigrating en masse again. The IMF runs the country, and so it is an important time for us to think about what that story from the 19th century means for us and for everyone else as well, and what we can learn from it.
Thank you, Maggie. This afternoon, I'm pleased to present two of my workmates who work closely together, who are from the same organization as I, Red Thread. I'm pleased to announce Joy Marcus, a mother of two, biologically, but a mother of 1,000, including my daughter. A mother to all of us, a woman activist, and a member of the Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike. I present to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Wintress. You might have noticed that Wintress said Joy and then Nicola. This joyful woman in front of you is Joy, but she's also Nicola. And yes, the mother of many children. And yes, I am as old as the Wages for Housework campaign. We want to talk to you today about how we have been organizing across race. And one of the examples in which we want to tell you about is during 2005, when we experienced the worst flood in our history. This flood affected grassroots women on the coast. We had more than 27 communities affected by this flood. What we had was Indo and Afro-Guyanese communities. Some were mixed and some were really in the Indo community by itself and African community by themselves. But all of them were affected by this terrible flood. Some of us were underwater for like 3 weeks. I mean, compared to other countries, it's nothing. But this is something that we have never experienced, so you could just imagine the state that we were in. Well, at Red Thread, what we did was to go out in communities because we wanted to look at people who were shut in, like pregnant mothers and the elderly and mothers with nursing children, to see what kind of assistance we could render. And then all of a sudden, our center was just being filled with people just pouring in because they understand that Red Thread was giving help to women in the flood. Now these women were desperate because, women are at the forefront of the survival of the family. And because we were at the forefront, we would be the ones going out, doing whatever it takes to ensure that our families survive. And so the women were pouring in, East Indian women, African women, pouring into the center, and we decided this is not what we want. We don't want the center to become a place that would give out charity. So we decided that what we have to do is to work with these women to organize so that they can get the help that they need. And that is what we did. Joycelyn is going to tell you a little bit more of how we did that.
Good afternoon. Joycelyn Bacchus. Pardon me, Wintress? Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. The chair is off tune because she did not get a chance to introduce me. So I can do it for myself. I'm Joycelyn Bacchus. I'm from Wintress. I'm also a mother of one. And biologically, I'm a mother of many also. That save you interest? All right.
And I think Joycelyn failed to add that she is the cheeriest person in Red Thread when things go hard. And she also keeps us on our toes when we are sick to use the remedies. Joycelyn, to you.
All right. Together more than 250 women across race. And we brought them together to organize to lobby the government and other authorities for the stuff that they lost during the flood. So we invited representatives of the UNDP, trade unionists, government authorities, economists, politicians, religious groups, and although the flood affected mainly the people on the coast, which was mainly Afro and Indo-Guyanese, we thought that we should invite somebody from the Amerindian Association, since when the Amerindians are on the coast, there is a government-run place named the Amerindian Hostel that housed them for free. So we did that. And a panel of 8 women from different races shared their experiences of that flood. They spoke of the hardship grassroots women faced in the struggle to survive. It was the first time ever that we ever had a chance to bring together so many African and Indian women in such large numbers. It was really, truly amazing. Nobody at that time decided, oh, I don't want to touch you because you're Indo or you're black. They came together, they forgot all about all that nonsense and focused on the goal, which is to organize to get back the stuff that they lost.
Okay, the way Joycelyn and I decided that we were going to do this presentation is that we're going to just chip in. On the day of this speak out, we had no problem. But at the beginning, we had tremendous problem. Because East Indian and African women were never together since in the 60s when we had this separation, when the politicians decided they were going to divide us. We're never together and working together on different issues. But this was the flood and people were very desperate and everybody were facing the same thing, but at the same time, they were hostile to each other. And what we did was we did a time use diary where people had recorded their time, the work that they did. And we used that to say to them, to ask them, what's the purpose of you being here? And then we were hearing the same thing, the flood, we lost this, we lost that, my child's sick, my husband's sick, and all these things. And we draw the conclusion to them that, listen, you're fighting for a common cause, and if you really want to be able to get something out of this, then you got to forget about who's different, because the flood did not look at who was different. So you have to forget about who was different and just do the work. And from then on, we really had a really smooth going because everybody wanted the same thing.
All right, so We then had this big speak out, like I mentioned before, which we invited all these government authorities and trade unions and whoever else. And the speak out, the women made the following demands. The money and materials raised in our names to be put urgently towards continued relief to all of us who need it. Fair distribution of supplies. Don't just choose me out because you know me or I related to you or something. Distribute this thing fairly. Our debts for goods and equipment damaged or destroyed, cancelled, because some people are taking things on hire purchase for resale, some people are taking things on hire purchase for home. So they were calling for those to be cancelled. More than just the poverty that we had before the flood, we want a better life. Meaning we need clean water, electricity, phone, proper health care. Again, don't just got to be sitting in an emergency room for many hours, falling out of the chairs. You pick us up, put us back there, or put us in a bed, we revive you, put us back in the chair to wait. We need proper health care and transportation we can afford. Like in the case of Maribel, who has to pay $7,000 if she wants to get out on the coast. And enough income and housing we can afford without going into debts. Cancellation of the national debt. A full written audit and public explanation of donations that government agencies, opposition parties, religious groups, NGOs and others receive in our names. How they were used, how the money was divided between the relief we actually received and what happened where they paid for the distribution of the relief. And what they still have in hand. You know, and talk with us, let me know what you intend to do with the rest. And an urgent cleanup of the soil because, of course, the water lingered there for weeks and there were all kinds of waterborne diseases floating around. And then and people for the agricultural purposes, you can trust the land to just go back to it like that. An urgent investigation as to why the floods actually happened. Was it natural or was it man-made? And if it was man-made, whose neglect that caused it? Who exactly is responsible? And to be part of a discussion to prevent another flood, because we are the ones who ensure the survival of our families and our communities.
As Joycelyn would have mentioned that, you know, these demands were both short-term and they were also long-term demands. Why we did it? We wanted women to be able to speak for themselves, to express what they were experiencing. Because the relevant authority, you know, a lot of them went around the city and said, oh my God, I'm sorry, but they were not the ones experiencing it. And we wanted the women to be able to say to them, this is what we're going through. So we invited these people there because we wanted them not to come and make any empty promises or to make speeches, but to listen to what we have to say. And if you're going to say anything, it's to answer to what we were demanding.
Right. And from that speak out, what we actually want was grassroots women bringing the opportunity of bringing together what we call the big hips. We brought the big ones to us and not us to them. Yes. It would have taken a lifetime just to have an appointment to say something to them on the flood. But it was a great victory of having them coming to us and listen to us and having them make no speech. Oh, that was awesome. And in that case, the women gained a political voice because they spoke together across race. The women were partially compensated after that speak out. They went back and made this big decision of giving them some money. So some got monies, some got back freezers and various different things. And for example, like two days after, and they were the people were told to make a list and bring it in. Not to say that they weren't, again, the same kind of, I know you, you come and sign and collect the money, and you could come and sign and collect for Nikki's own. And when Nikki show up, you collect it already. We still had some of that, but at least the women were able to get something. And I'll just speak out. We had some really good organizing work because we were able to form a multiracial network, which is something we were aiming for a long time ago. And that network is called Grassroots Women Across Race. And it still exists, even though in a very loose manner, because of the size and geographical location and money and all these various obstacles. Yes, we weren't able to get them together, but we still keep informed via the phone, via newsletters, and such things.
And since, because you know our indigenous women, sorry, because we know that they're far away, whenever we get a chance to bring them out to the city, we try to make much of the time. So we organize a whole lot of events, so by the time they get back, they're tired because we want to use them up as much as possible because this doesn't happen all the time. And so we would organize like street theaters, we organize demos, we organize TV talk shows because you can't get that in the interior, but when they bring them out and they go on the television and everybody could hear what's happening in the interior to women there. And the disadvantage is money. We don't have the money to do the amount of work, and that is why Joycelyn mentioned that the multiracial network is, exists but in a loose way. So what we do when we get a chance, we would get like about 5 women coming out from the interior to all these different events. We ensure like International Women's Day, there's the May Day, Labor March, Workers March, which we ensure that we participate in to say that we are workers too, and you have to recognize us for the work we're doing. And so we ensure that they're part of that. And when we go up, sometimes you could only go like 2 persons. One, the good thing about it, just give me half minute. I was here this morning, I know what it is. One good thing about it is that we were able to get some money to extend our center to facilitate a dorm so that when the women come out, they can stay there so we don't have to pay for accommodation. We're hoping that someday somebody would be really, really generous and give us a bus so we could go up as we want and they could come as they want. Thank you so much.